The movie begins as Cairo, an 18-year-old girl, narrates what it is to be an adult. She lives alone in her house because her parents, who are lawyers, are permanently abroad. She talks about how she finds an escape in writing and longs to be loved and not feel lonely. She mentions meeting a teacher who is also a writer. Cairo walks into class where Jonathan Miller, a literature teacher, is already in even though the class won't start for another hour. She tells him that she lives in Level Hill, and he is very amazed. He gives her a list of books they will be going through in class.
Her second time attending this class. Her stomach growls and she goes out with Cairo to get some food. After they left, Jonathan checked out the books Cairo brought to class. His friend and colleague Boris gets in and asks what he was reading. The book Jonathan was holding is an erotic fiction, and Boris took it before he started reading it out loud. Jonathan takes the book and goes over to eat the biscuits that Boris made. Boris finds Jonathan's book from Cairo and tells him she is also the only one who checked it out. Back at their house, Beatrix is buried in her work as Jonathan tries to get her attention. He tells her about Cairo and the kind of book she reads. He also lets her know that she has checked out his book from the library, but Beatrix mocks him. She gets a call from Amy, and Jonathan leaves to open some music as she gets angry over the phone. They share a drink as Jonathan starts reciting lines from a book called Under the Roofs of Paris. As he kisses her, they started dancing and making out. Beatrice's phone rang and she had to leave. Boris complains about having a terrible weekend as he and Jonathan are sitting on the court. They look over to the woods, and Boris told him that there could be ghosts in there, and the plant feeds on the souls of the dead. Cairo walks out of the woods and greets them. Both of them kept asking her questions, and Boris offered her some biscuits before he left while mocking Jonathan. Jonathan asks if she doesn't get scared walking through the woods all by herself, but she tells him she's the scariest thing in there. As Boris walks into the hallway, Winnie stops him and starts teasing him. He stops and talks to her as she tells him she wants to be in his class and he can tutor her. Cairo watches them converse from a corner. Winnie tells her that she is seducing Boris and asks if she is jealous in a sing-song voice. Winnie and Cairo are in Cairo's house while she is smoking. Winnie asks where her parents could be at this time, and Cairo tells her even though she doesn't know how long they'll be there. Winnie asks Cairo to let her dress her up, saying she can be both smart and hot. Cairo is writing an essay to get into Yale, and she couldn't answer a question that asks what her greatest achievement is. Winnie tries to help her, but they can't find the right answer. She finally tells her to experience something worth writing about. Cairo asks her if she really is going to sleep with Boris, and Winnie tells her she wants an older man to do it with as it will be her first time doing it. Winnie tells Cairo that Jonathan looks at her differently from all the other students, but Cairo said she couldn't believe it. In class, Cairo kept looking at Jonathan. He then asks her to see him after school. Boris is in Jonathan's class asking about Beatrix and the book she's writing. He is invited for dinner, and Jonathan tells him to shower before he comes over. After Boris leaves his class, Jonathan opens the music and starts dancing. He finds Cairo giggling when he turns around. They sit by the couch and Jonathan asks if she's been to the scroll sessions at Sally Bunny's, a poetry salon in a Victorian village, and tells her to go on the coming weekend. The reason why he wanted to see her was because of the story she wrote about a reluctant spider. Then he recited some lines from the story before they continued to talk about the spider. He then tells her that she is talented and offers her a jump start on the midterm. He assigned her to write a short story in the style of her favorite author. He says that it could help with her portfolio for Yale. Cairo tells Jonathan that she read his book and called it grand and tragic romantic horror. Then she quotes lines from his book. He tells her that was the first thing he wrote and that he hasn't written anything recently since he got married and started teaching. But Cairo challenges him, saying he isn't inspired. Winnie joins them as they're talking. Boris, Jonathan, and Beatrice went out for dinner where Winnie was the waitress. Beatrix asks why their order is not served yet, and Winnie offers a drink on her. Boris and Winnie sneered at each other, and Winnie called Jonathan a boring teacher, to which Boris laughed. Jonathan tells Beatrix that she is Cairo's friend. Before they discuss her, Beatrix tells Jonathan that he is better at teaching than writing, and that it isn't for him. They both tell him it's not because he can't write that he's not a writer, it's because he stopped writing and chose to be a teacher. On Saturday, Cairo went to the poetry place Jonathan suggested, hoping to find him there. Soon, Jonathan joins her. She asks if he knows all the people there and if what they're doing is like group therapy. A man named Elliot starts reciting a play as they all listen. After the play was over, Jonathan and Cairo were outside, and he asked if she thought it was going to be bad, and she said yes, while giggling. Boris and Jonathan are sitting in their usual place when Cairo brings them coffee. Boris offers her a biscuit he made, and she suggests that he sells them to raise money for his team and that she will help with Jonathan in school. Jonathan gets a text from Beatrice, suggesting that they go on a trip for the weekend. Cairo and Winnie went by Jonathan's class to find him hurrying to leave. He tells them about the trip with his wife. Cairo asks him for approval on the writer she chose for the midterm. They chatted briefly, and he left. Winnie starts teasing Cairo about how she spoke to Jonathan while sitting on his desk, and Boris walks in on their conversation. He agrees with the biscuit baking idea and asks them both to assist. Winnie stops him and asks for his number to make things easier and faster. After getting Boris's phone to call Cairo, she puts it in her chest and is about to leave, but Boris retrieves it. Jonathan is waiting for Beatrix to finish up when he gets a call from Cairo on her phone. He had her phone in his bag, and she called to ask him to drop it off at her place. By the time he arrives, it is raining, and he asks Cairo to come to his side, where the rain is pouring before they kiss. Cairo is at home watching TV and reminiscing about the event, while Jonathan is at home with Beatrice. Beatrix apologizes for canceling their vacation due to work. After receiving the midterm assignment from Cairo, he went outside and started reading it. What she wrote was an intimate story portrayed by them. Jonathan starts to please himself while reading the story. On Monday, Cairo waited for Jonathan in his class, and he walked past her after greeting her coldly. He tells her that she needs to choose another author because her story is inappropriate. He asks her why she chose that material, and she answers that it's about them. She tries to explain that the story is appropriate in different aspects, but he tells her to write a new story with a new author. Cairo tells him to stop talking to her like a stranger and tell her what he means, so he tells her to rewrite it, and if she doesn't, he will have to fail her for the midterm. He tells her he feels foolish and calls her a child. He says that if she can convince them that something happened between them, he could lose his job. Beatrix asks if something happened between them as teenagers, which is very dangerous, and if he should know what he's doing. The next few days, Cairo didn't show up to school, and Winnie looked very sad. She asked Jonathan if he'd seen her, but he coldly says he didn't. Cairo and Jonathan are being questioned by the principal Joyce. Cairo tells her that he gave her the midterm assignment in advance, and that they used to meet before, during, and after class to talk about literature. She said that he was impressed that she knew who he was. Jonathan tells Joyce that Cairo was very talented and that he gave her mentorship as she is better than the curriculum. Jonathan claims that they know each other as is appropriate for a student and a teacher. He mentioned the time he went to her place to give her phone back, and the vacation he and Beatrice were supposed to go on. He said that he didn't touch her, and that when she sent the story, he told her it was inappropriate for school. Boris asks Jonathan if he's in love with Cairo before he tells him that he can't identify the line, and that's why he crosses it. Then they get into an argument and Boris leaves. Jonathan confesses to Beatrix that he's suspended, but soon they get into a fight where it escalates and gets personal. Jonathan calls Beatrix an alcoholic, and she tells him he's boring and that's why she drinks. That was only the beginning of their fight. Winnie goes to see Cairo and asks what she's doing to Jonathan. Cairo tells her that she's testifying against him in front of the school board because he underestimated her. Winnie tells her she will testify against her, but Cairo blackmails her with the evidence she has of her and Boris. Cairo tells her that this is her greatest achievement. The movie ends as Cairo stands on her bed reading her essay about her and Jonathan. As we see Jonathan losing his job, Boris and Winnie walking past each other as strangers, and finally Cairo finding Jonathan and crying as she sees him in school. Even though she's hurt, she says that she believes what happened has shaped her into something new. A hero, a villain,
Today we're
and a
going to
writer.
do a review of the movie named The Reader from 2008. The movie begins in 1995 Berlin, where a well-dressed man named Michael Berg is preparing breakfast for a young brunette woman named Bridget, who has stayed the night with him. The two part awkwardly, and as Michael watches a tram pass by outside, it reminds him of his past as he sees a younger version of himself sitting in the tram, and the film flashes back to another tram in early 1958 Neustadt, West Germany, during a rainy winter day. An unhappy-looking teenage Michael gets off from the tram, but wanders around the streets afterwards, finally pausing in the entryway of a nearby apartment building where he starts to vomit. Hanna Schmitz, the tram conductor, comes in and sees Michael puking. She helps him get clean of the vomit with buckets of water. She sees Michael crying and picks him up, hugs him, and tells him it's going to be all right. She asks him where he lives and assists him in returning home. Michael reaches home to his family, and they're all eating while Michael's mother points out that he looks sick and needs to see a doctor. Michael's father says he looks fine, and the boy said he does not need a doctor. Michael's younger sister, Emily, replies that he does need a doctor, to which Michael replies that he does not need a doctor. Even after denying all medical attention, Michael's family gets a doctor for his checkup due to the fact that he's getting more sick. The doctor checks him and asks his age. His mother tells the doctor that Michael is 15 years old now. The doctor diagnoses him with scarlet fever, and tells them he must be isolated completely and rest at home for the next 3 months. Michael's mother tells Emily to keep distance from Michael because he's contagious, and shuts his door. All Michael can do is examine his stamps and bide his time. After he recovers as the spring season arrives, he returns to the apartment building to deliver a bouquet of flowers to Hanna at her apartment and thank her. She lets him in, and he tells her that he was very sick with scarlet fever and was on bed rest for 3 months, which is why he came after that long time to thank her. She tells him to put the bouquet of flowers in the sink and tells him that it's good for him that he's well now. Michael decides and tells her that he's going to leave now, but she asks him to escort her to work on the tram line and wait for her in the hall for her while she gets dressed. However, when she catches him spying on her as she dresses, he runs away in shame. Later, he sees her on the tram but does not approach her. Michael returns to her apartment to apologize a few days later. He arrives before her and sees her coming upstairs with a bucket of coal. She sees Michael and tells him that there are 2 more buckets downstairs. Go fill them up and bring them back to her apartment. He brings the buckets of coal back to her apartment, looking all messed up with his face covered in coal dust. She laughs at him and tells him to see his face in the mirror, and he laughs too. She tells Michael not to worry, and she will set a bath for him to clean up. She tells Michael to take his clothes off and get in the tub. She brings the towel for Michael while hiding herself behind it. Michael gets up from the tub, and he turns his back for her, and she covers him up with the towel. The camera moves backward, and it's revealed that she's naked as well. She removes the towel and starts kissing Michael's back, and asks him if this is what he wanted, and is this why he returned to her apartment. She turns Michael to face her and tries to kiss him, but he hesitates, so she tells him to look at her. He tells her that she's very pretty, and kisses her back. The scene changes back to Michael at his house sitting with his family and eating food while he sits with a smile on his face. The scene shifts back and forth with Michael sitting and observing his family eating, and he and Hanna making love to each other. Michael's family questions him why he got home so late, that his mother has been worrying about him. He lies and tells them that he got confused with the roads and got lost. His sister, Emily, accuses him that he's lying, that how could a person get lost in his own hometown? Michael's mother hushes her and tells her that she believes Michael because he never lies. Michael tries to find excuses to see Hanna, so he tells his family that he wants to continue his school, and he's much better now. His family advises him against it, and tells him that the doctor has said he still needs bed rest of at least a week or 3. He ignores and proceeds to go to school anyways. After school, he rushes back to Hanna's apartment, and they both start to take off their clothes and jump in the bed. She teaches him how to make love, while he looks a bit worried and cheerful at the same time. After they're done making love, he persuades her to tell him her name. She gets a bit worried and asks why he wants to know her name. He tells her that he's been coming to see her 3 times, and what's wrong with it if he wants to know her name. She laughs and admires him, telling him that there's nothing wrong with it, and tells him that her name is Hanna. She asks him what his name is. He says, "I'm Michael." Michael returns to her every day after school, rejecting the clear interest of girls his own age. The two begin a sordid affair that lasts through that spring and the summer when he's off from school. Their liaisons, all at her apartment, are characterized by her asking him to read literary works he's studying in school, such as The Odyssey, The Lady with the Dog, and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. He sells his stamp collection so they can go on a bicycling tour in the countryside. They go together on the tour. They stop at a small restaurant to eat, where Hanna feels a bit overwhelmed because of her age, and Michael and a bunch of other kids around them. After their meal, they go to a chapel where she sees a bunch of kids singing in a choir. She starts crying with joy after listening to them. They go swimming in the lake, where Hanna asks Michael to join her, but he refuses. He tells her that he's writing a poem about her, and he will read it to her when it's completed. Michael is looking at the journal in which he's writing the poem about Hanna, and the scene cuts back to the current Michael in the present time in 1995, who is also looking at that same journal in which he wrote everything about his life with Hanna in a daily sequence. He leaves his place and heads to his car and rushes to reach the court. His assistant helps in wearing his black lawyer's robe and enters the courtroom. Everyone is seated in the room, and the scene cuts back to 15-year-old Michael, who's studying in the class and paying attention to Sophie, his classmate. After school, he goes swimming with his classmates, and he leaves them to see Hanna. When Hanna is promoted by the tram company to a better-paying position in an office job, she becomes unsettled. When Michael arrives at her apartment for one of their trysts, she suddenly snaps at him when he tries to read her Chekhov's The Lady with the Dog. She gives Michael a bath and washes him. They make love one last time, and she then moves away without telling him where she's going. Michael returns to her apartment and finds her place empty, and he's left alone, heartbroken. The scene cuts back to present Michael from 1995, who goes out on a dinner with his daughter, Julia, who's 21 at the moment and has just returned from a year in Paris. They both eat and catch up with each other. Michael drops his daughter off, and the scene cuts back to young Michael, but 8 years later, in 1966 this time. Michael is now 23 and attends Heidelberg Law School. As part of a special seminar taught by Professor Roll, a concentration camp survivor, he observes a trial of several women who were accused of letting 300 Jewish women die in a burning church when they were SS guards on the death marches following the 1944 evacuation of Auschwitz concentration camp. Michael is stunned to see that Hanna is one of the defendants. He visits a former camp himself to try to come to terms with this. The trial divides the seminar, with one student angrily saying there's nothing to be learned from it other than that evil acts occurred. He tells Roll that the older generation of Germans should kill themselves for their failure to act then and now to stop the Holocaust. The key evidence is the testimony of Alana Mather, a young Jewish woman who has written a memoir about how she and her mother survived. When Hanna testifies, unlike her fellow defendants, she admits that she was aware the whole time that Auschwitz was an extermination camp. She also admits that all the SS guards, herself included, would randomly choose 10 prisoners each. These prisoners would then be executed to make way for the new prisoners that arrive so that overcrowding does not occur. In Hanna's case, she would choose the physically weak and less able-bodied prisoners to their deaths. She would also make the prisoners read to her. Every evening, Hanna would randomly choose one female prisoner to read a book to her in her office before taking them back to their cell, as she takes great enjoyment in being read to. Every prisoner that would read books to Hanna would be later killed. Michael, present in the court upon hearing this, gets very emotional and sad, and realizes about the time he spent with her was similar too, that he was weak and sick, and she helped him and made him read books to her and made love, only to be stranded alone and heartbroken in the end. Further charges against Hanna whilst an SS guard also included 300 counts of murder brought about when an aerial bombing raid by the Allied forces accidentally hit a church where the prisoners were sleeping for the night. The church's roof collapsed and a fire ensued. The prisoners tried to escape the burning church, however all exits were locked. The SS guards, Hanna included, had the power to unlock the exits to let the prisoners escape, but they did not. Only 2 prisoners survived, Alana Mather and her mother. Hanna strongly denies that she personally authorized a report to lock the church exit doors, preventing the prisoners from escaping, despite pressure from the other defendants. When the prosecutor produces a document with Hanna's signature on it authorizing the church incident, she continues to deny the charges by claiming that someone forged her signature. However, when she is asked to provide a handwritten sample of her signature to compare it to the signature on the document, Hanna suddenly retracts her denials and admits to signing the document. In the courtroom audience, Michael then realizes Hanna's secret. She's illiterate and has made many of her life choices to conceal that. Even her choice to join the SS was made because of her desire to avoid a job promotion, meaning she would have had to reveal her illiteracy. Without being specific, Michael informs Roll that he has information favorable to one of the defendants, but is not sure what to do since the defendant herself wants to avoid disclosing this. Roll tells him that if he has learned nothing from the past, there's no point in having the seminar. Michael decides to confront Hanna in the prison, and goes to the prison only to chicken out at the last moment, and leaves the prison yard, while Hanna is waiting in the visiting area, unaware of who's going to visit her and where they are. Hanna receives a life sentence for her role in the church deaths, while the other defendants get prison terms of a few years. Upon hearing this, Michael starts shedding tears and heads back in the train, and the scene changes back to older Michael, but this time in 1976. Michael graduated from the law school and gradually became a successful lawyer. He married a young woman named Martha, and together they have a daughter, whom they name Julia. But Michael remains emotionally withdrawn. His marriage ends a few years later when Martha leaves him, and he becomes distant from his daughter. Michael is on a train with his daughter Julia, and they're heading back to Neustadt, West Germany, his hometown. He goes to his parents' house with little Julia and visits his mother. He tells his mother that he has bad news to tell her, which is that he and his wife Gertrude are getting a divorce, and there's no need to worry about Gertrude because she's already a state prosecutor and she's earning far more than him already. He tells her that she will be all right. His mother tells him that she's not worried about Gertrude, but she's more worried about him. She tells him that you did not attend your father's funeral, yet you came back to break the news about your divorce. He tells her that it's hard for him to return to this town because of the past he had, a secret affair with a woman twice his age who also happened to be part of committing genocide. He heads to his old room and opens all of his old stuff. He grabs and opens a book which happens to be The Odyssey by Homer. He sits and reads it under the lamplight. Upon rediscovering his books and notes from the time of his affair with Hanna, he, knowing Hannah's secret that she cannot read, decides to reestablish contact with her by reading some of those works into a tape recorder. He sits all day and night on the table in the bed to record all the books and poems for her. He sends the cassettes and another tape recorder to her in prison. He sends her tapes of The Odyssey and Chekhov's The Lady with the Dog, which he was going to read to her last time when they had their final fight before Hanna disappeared. One day she goes to the library and asks for a book, The Lady with the Little Dog. She brings the book back to her cell and tries to learn and teach herself how to read and write. She plays Michael's recordings. At the same time, she pauses it and tries to read the words written in the book. She counts words and encircles them and learns to pronounce them by copying Michael. Eventually, she uses this to teach herself to read the books herself from the prison library and eventually writes back to him. It's 1980, and Michael checks his mail and finds a letter from Hanna. He opens the letter and it says that she liked his tapes and wants more. He records more tapes and sends them to her, but does not write back to her. Hanna receives the tapes and keeps sending him more letters, either criticizing the content in the tape or asking if Michael is getting her letters. She receives more tapes and expects letters from him, but Michael still does not write her back. It's 1988 now. The prison's warden writes to Michael to seek his help in arranging for the aged Hanna after her forthcoming release on parole. She tells him that she has been in prison for 20 years and she has no family, friends, or any place to live. She tells Michael that this new world is going to be frightening because the world has changed a lot and she'll have a job and a place to live. She tells him that he's the only one who contacts her and that she's aware that Michael does not visit her or write her, but only sends her tapes. Michael tells her that it's very kind of her to feel the need to care for Hanna and that she's contacted him, and he ends the call. Michael processes it for a few days about what he's going to do for her, and then he finally agrees to see Hanna in the prison. He arrives in the prison and meets Louisa Brenner, the prison warden who contacted Michael about Hanna's situation. She tells him that they were expecting him earlier, and takes Michael to Hanna. She tells Michael that she has held herself for the past few years, and she's changed. She tells him that she's taking him directly to the cafeteria because the prisoners have just finished their lunch. He reluctantly agrees to sponsor Hanna. He tells Hanna that he has a friend who's a tailor and is willing to offer her a job. He also tells her that he's found an apartment for her, and it's very small, but she'll like it, and she thanks him. He tells her that there are various social programs, cultural stuff that he can sign her up for, and the public library is very close to the apartment he found for her. He asks her, "You read a lot?" To which she replies, "I prefer being read too," which are the exact words she told Michael back in 1956 when they were having a secret affair and Michael suggested she read a book. She asks Michael if he got married. Michael tells her that he indeed got married and he has a daughter now. He tells her that he has not been able to see his daughter that much, probably because of his work, but he would love to see a great deal of her and spend time with her. He also tells Hanna that his marriage did not last long and he is divorced at the moment. He goes on and asks her if she has spent her time thinking about the past. With a shade of joy on her face, she responds if he means thinking about the past with him. With an offended look on his face, Michael replies no, he did not mean with him. He meant her past as an SS guard and the actions she took. She gets a bit sad and tells him no, she did not. Before the trial, she did not think about her past in Auschwitz. She never had to. He asks her what about now? What does she feel now about her measures that got her on the road of torture that ended her up in prison? She tells him it doesn't matter what she feels. It doesn't even matter what she thinks, because the dead are still dead. That they are not getting their lives back if she thinks she's guilty or feels that she did something very brutally wrong, something that robbed so many people of the chance of having a better standard of life. He tells her that he only wanted to know this because he was not sure what she learned from this. She tells him that she's learned plenty of it. She tells him that she has taught herself and learned how to read. He sighs and tells her that he'll pick her up next week. She tells him that it sounds like a good plan and to take good care of himself. He tells her to take good care as well and leaves the prison. The next week, before Michael comes to pick her up from prison, we see Hanna in her cell, collecting some of the books and placing them together on the table and dragging the table in the middle of the cell. She slowly takes her shoes off and puts them aside. She stands on the table and on the books and commits suicide by hanging herself in the cell. When the time of her release arrives and Michael comes to the prison to pick her up, only to find out that she's committed suicide and left him alone once more. The warden takes Michael to Hanna's cell. Michael sees that Hanna had written a paragraph from the book The Lady with the Dog on a page and pasted it on the cell wall. The warden tells him that Hanna had left a note for Michael. It's more like a will. The warden reads the will for him, which states that there's a tea tin with cash in it and there are 7,000 marks in the bank, handed over to Michael Berg, who will forward it to the daughter who survived the fire. It is for her. She would decide what to do with it. And tell Michael that I said hello. She leaves Michael with a task to give her life savings to the family of one of the prisoners at Auschwitz. Michael starts to cry in the cell while the warden hands him the tea tin. Later, Michael travels to New York to meet Alana. She was the prisoner at Auschwitz who survived the fire and was in the court with her mother and pointed out the guards who did not free them and left them to burn and die. Michael reaches her fancy place, and Alana's maid tells Michael to wait in the hall for her. Michael looks around her apartment, and Alana arrives and tells Michael that she was expecting him. She asks Michael what brought him here in the United States. He tells her that he was already here in the United States. He was attending a conference in Boston. She asks if he's a lawyer, and he says yes. She tells him she read his letter, and she was intrigued by it, but she did not entirely understand it. She asks him if he attended the trial 20 years ago. Michael tells her that he did indeed attend the trial. He was a law student at the time, and he remembers seeing Alana and her mother at the court very clearly. She tells Michael that her mother died in Israel many years ago. Michael gives her his condolences. He cuts to the chase and tells her that perhaps she must have heard that Hanna Schmitz recently died. She killed herself by hanging herself in her prison cell. She assumes Michael's looks and asks him if Hanna was a friend of his. He says that she was kind of a friend. He tells her that Hanna was illiterate for most of her life, meaning probably even the time when she was an SS guard. She asks him if that is the explanation of her behavior or an excuse. He responds no. He tells her that Hanna was illiterate and she liked it when someone else read anything to her. He tells her that's why he sent her recorded tapes of books and literature while she was in prison, and she educated herself. She taught herself how to read and write with the help of his recorded tapes and books of the same tapes. Ilana knows that Hanna also liked it when she made the prisoners in the camps read things to her. She starts to weep and asks if he would start by being honest with her, at least start that way. She confronts him properly by asking him what the nature of his and Hanna's friendship was. Michael confesses and tells her that when he was young, he had an affair with Hanna. He tells her that he was only 16 when their affair started, and it only lasted for one summer, but... She asks, but what? Michael pauses, and she realizes that Michael was in love with her. She asks him if Hanna Schmitz acknowledges the effect she had on his life. He too gets all weepy and emotional and tells her that she had done worse to so many people that he does not believe she acknowledged him, even though Hanna admits to him that she did not even think or acknowledge about the victims before the trials. He confesses that he had never told anyone about his secret affair with Hanna, except until now. She tells Michael that people ask her about the camps all the time. What have you learned from them? She says the camps were not some sort of therapy that you should learn from. They were not some kind of universities you go to learn. She tells him that one becomes very clear about these things. She asks him what he wants. Forgiveness for her, or does he just want to feel better for himself? She tells him that he should go to the theater if he's seeking catharsis, or go to literature, but please do not go to the camps. Nothing comes out of the camps. He finally tells her why he's here at her place, and what Hanna actually wanted for Ilana. Michael tells her that she left you her money and wanted you to have it. She asks him what she's supposed to do with her money. He tells her however she thinks is the best way to spend it. He reaches into his bag and takes out the tea tin from Hanna with her money in it. He hands her the tin, and she sees the tin and smiles, because it reminds her of the time when she was a little girl herself and would collect treasures in a tea tin. She tells him that she took it with her to the camp, but it got stolen. Michael asks what was in it. She tells him just some sentimental things, a hair of their dog, some tickets to the opera. She opens the tin, sees the money, and slides it towards Michael, and tells him that they're of no use for her, that this money is associated with the extermination of the Jews. Michael suggests that he should donate the money to an organization that encourages adult literacy. He asks if there's any sort of Jewish organization that does that. She tells him that there are all kinds of Jewish organizations now. Michael takes the money and asks her if he should donate them in Hanna's name, to which she replies, however he sees fit. Ilana keeps the tea tin since it's similar to the one she herself had owned before being sent to the camps, where it was taken from her to be melted down. In the present day of 1995, Michael reunites with his daughter, Julia. He admits his failings as a father, and drives her to a church that he and Hanna had visited during their bicycle tour nearby 40 years earlier, so they can reminisce about the old times.
Winds breathing soft, sails catching light, nights on the ocean, stars shining.
Recap a 2006 romance drama movie. Name notes on a scandal. So, let's begin. It is the beginning of a new term at a comprehensive school in London. Barbara Covett is a history teacher with one secret. She loathes her students and despises her fellow teachers. Barbara also has a habit of journaling every day and expressing her feelings. Barbara has contempt for how teachers try to connect with students who are getting better at sneaking in drugs. During a meeting, the principal introduces a new art teacher, Sheba Hart. Barbara helps dissolve a fight in Sheba's class after a boy called Stephen Connolly beats up another boy for speaking inappropriately about Sheba. After this encounter, Sheba thanks Barbara for her help and so begins a friendship that would end in disaster. Barbara expresses how attracted she is becoming to the beautiful woman with a nice voice. Over the next scenes, we see Barbara and Sheba interacting more and becoming greater friends. One time, Sheba invites Barbara for lunch at her place and Barbara takes this as a great affair. She buys new clothes and makes her hair. However, she is surprised when she meets Richard, Sheba's husband. He is almost 20 years older than his wife, and she hates him as soon as she sees him. Barbara also meets Sheba's daughter Polly, who is in a relationship with a boy from school. Soon, Barbara's illusion of Sheba being in a perfect marriage with perfect children is shattered when she meets Sheba's son, who has a disability. During the meal, Barbara expresses disgust at every little thing the family does, only consoling herself by thinking about Sheba romantically. She notes that Sheba gets a phone call she picks up in secret. Sheba also shows Barbara her shed where she practices her art. After a while, Sheba expresses grief at losing her father and explains how her marriage with Richard is wonderful but does not give her meaning. She is also tired since she had spent the last 10 years taking care of their son Ben. Barbara slyly listens to her story while in reality, she wants to get closer to Sheba for her own selfish needs. Barbara's obsession takes on new heights when she starts documenting everything about Sheba and even posting pictures and hair strands on Sheba in her diary. One time during a school play, Barbara realizes that Sheba is taking too long to join her, so she decides to see what is keeping her. She nearly gets a stroke when she sees Sheba in a classroom with the 15-year-old Steve, who had been caught in a fight a few days ago. Barbara takes the news personally, feeling very betrayed, and she decides to act on it. As she is pondering the best thing to do, she realizes that she better confront Sheba directly. She calls Sheba and asks to meet her about Steve, asking that she meets her soon. Barbara accuses Sheba of committing a crime by sleeping with an underage student and asks Sheba to explain how the affair started. Sheba explains that it started the day Barbara gave Steve a telling off for the fight. Sheba says that the boy would do little gestures like scoring goals for her and always being nice to her. One time, Steve shows Sheba some of the pictures he'd drawn of her, and this motivates Sheba to start teaching Steve after school. For 2 weeks, all goes well until Sheba accidentally ruffles Steve's hair. Sheba realizes that she is treading on dangerous grounds and cancels the classes. However, Steve is relentless, and one day, he confesses that his father hits him. Steve cannot tell his mother since she is sick with kidney disease and has a few months left unless she undergoes surgery. The vulnerability of the little boy touches a spot in Sheba's head, and she decides to meet him that night at a bridge. Their meeting is intimate, and that begins the first of many sexual encounters. Barbara cannot believe that Sheba would do such a thing, and Sheba expresses guilt at it, saying that she felt needed with Steve. Sheba also states that she wanted to tell Barbara about the affair but felt she would put her dear friend in an impossible situation. She tells Barbara not to tell anyone until after Christmas since she needs to spend the holidays with her family. Barbara explains that she is not going to reveal the secret provided that Sheba ends things with the young boy immediately. Barbara realizes that by pretending to support Sheba through this, she will be closer to her and thus fall in love. Sheba gets home and finds that Polly's boyfriend cannot come and join the family for the Christmas celebrations. Barbara explains that Polly has a fetish for her boyfriend, and it is clear that Barbara detests everyone in Sheba's life. Barbara joins her sister for the celebrations at Christmas. Barbara's sister asks her about a younger teacher, Jennifer, who she was close with. Barbara acts uninterested and explains that the teacher fell ill and changed schools. Elsewhere, we see that Sheba ends the relationship with Steve, but the younger boy approaches Sheba at her home during the holidays. Sheba is unable to pull through with the breakup and ends up dating the boy. After Steve leaves, Sheba breaks down, showing that she feels bad for what she is doing, but the thrill of it makes it a temptation she cannot resist. Meanwhile, Barbara's sister asks her if there is someone after Jennifer, implying that Barbara might be a lesbian. Sheba gives Barbara a picture frame as a gift for the holidays, and as usual, Barbara takes this as a gesture. Sheba continues her illicit affair but keeps it super hidden. However, she occasionally hooks up with Steve at her art lair. Barbara's beloved cat falls ill, and this really affects her as she had grown very attached to it. The vet tells her that the cat would die in a few weeks, and she takes her woes to Sheba. Barbara takes advantage of the situation by asking Sheba to help lift her moods by practicing something she used to do at her former school. Barbara asks Sheba to stretch her arms, and she begins stroking her, trying to ignite some passion. Sheba realizes that the gesture might be more than what it is supposed to be, and she asks Barbara to leave. Barbara is hesitant until she sees someone climb over Sheba's garden and go into Sheba's house. She tells Sheba to call the police, but Sheba says it must have been the neighbor's kid. Suddenly, her phone rings and Barbara makes a go for it, realizing that Sheba is still having an affair with Steve. Barbara looks at Sheba in disbelief and she storms out. Sheba follows her, explaining that she tried to end things but she couldn't. Barbara tells Sheba that Steve cannot be with her for a long time and is merely using her to fulfill his fantasies. When things become heated, he is sure to dump her because she is so young. Barbara threatens to reveal the affair to Richard if Sheba does not end the relationship. Sheba goes to Steve's house and meets Steve's father, who is nothing like the vicious man he had depicted him to be. After Steve learns that the affair is out, he dumps Sheba, explaining that he wanted to have fun, hence he created the kidney and abuse story. Sheba is so devastated and she seeks comfort in Barbara. Over the next days, we see Barbara happy at Sheba's anguish since the poor woman can only share her sorrows with her. While Sheba's betrayal might have hurt her more than she lets on, Barbara feels that this misfortune helped bring her and Sheba closer together and she would soon get what she longs for. Barbara takes Sheba to a certain spot overlooking the city and confesses about Jennifer, saying that she suffered from depression. Sheba listens to the story, not knowing that Barbara is manipulating her and preying on her vulnerabilities. One time, this perfect illusion is shattered when Barbara learns that her cat is to be put down as its time to travel to the animal kingdom has come. Barbara is advised to return for her final goodbyes and she goes to visit Sheba, intending to bring her along. However, Sheba and her family are headed to Ben's school for a play he is participating in. Sheba explains that she cannot abandon her son, that Barbara asks her to choose. Sheba chooses to go with her family and Barbara assumes this to be a betrayal, suffering from a rage that knows no reason. After burying her cat later, Barbara is in her house reveling in the betrayal Sheba had committed when someone knocks at her door. It is Brian, a colleague of hers who also has an interest in Sheba. Barbara states that Sheba does not share her intimate life with her, but she has heard rumors that she is engaged with Steve. Letting the cat out of the bag seems to send a message that Barbara is not the kind-hearted woman she seemed to be. After Brian leaves, Sheba calls inviting Barbara over for dinner. Barbara is at Sheba's house when someone pounds at the door. Steve's mother comes in and starts attacking Sheba, asking how she could do such a thing to her child. This whole fiasco attracts Polly and Ben, not to mention the fallout between Richard and Sheba. Barbara sits on the sidelines watching it all play out and denying knowledge of the affair. However, her ruse is up when the principal reveals that he knows about Jennifer. Apparently, Jennifer had filed a restraining order on Barbara since she was stalking her and her fiancé. Barbara agrees to resign. She links up with Sheba, who is sad, thinking that Steve had revealed the affair to his mother. Due to the argument with Richard, Sheba moves out and starts living with Barbara. Barbara explains that the month she stays with Sheba is the best one of her life. She expresses how tempted she has been to have her way with Sheba, but she will be patient. The news of the scandal is broadcasted everywhere and journalists are camping outside Barbara's house. One day, Barbara is at the market purchasing some supplies when Sheba sees a trail of golden stars and a piece of diary paper in the trash. She starts rummaging through the house and finds the diary, revealing that Barbara had been the one to let the affair out. Sheba strikes Barbara when she comes back, realizing what a psycho she really is. Sheba gets out, but the media bombard her and she gets overwhelmed until Barbara saves her. However, she puts an end to that toxic relationship with Barbara and goes back home. From a newspaper article, we learn that Sheba got 10 months of jail time but might have reconciled with her family. Meanwhile, Barbara meets a young woman at the spot overlooking the city and befriends her, inviting her to a concert. Maybe this woman is a predator looking at her next victim. And with this, our movie ends here.